Well, thank you for being here. I want to start with a very quick story. About 7, maybe 8 years ago, my company, Sparkbox, was hired by a very large online retailer, e-commerce, and they wanted help redesigning their product detail page. So this page, billions of US dollars come through every year, this one page, all of their products across many brands. And they wanted to redesign it, make it friendly for people on small screens and large screens. And so we came and worked with them, and we worked for an entire year, slowly iterating, testing, evolving this one page. And at the end of that year, when we looked back at the work we had done, we had taken a very systematic approach, right? Broken it down into pieces so that we could reuse those pieces. And we weren't building with the intent of creating a design system for them, but by the end of that time, we had created the beginnings of one. And so we went to the folks inside the company and asked them, we've done a lot of good work here. Could we take this work, turn it into a design system so you can use those good design elements across the whole online experience? And our peers inside the organization were excited for this, and they said, yes, let's do it. And so we started another year of work, working on these small pieces and parts and expanding those to include other pages and other experiences. And at the end of that second year, we had built the beginnings of a really good system for them. We got a phone call from them saying, stop all work on the design system. And this was a very big customer for us. We had a lot of people working on this, so it was a scary call to receive. And this was the moment for me that I realized I needed to better understand how design systems would serve our customers and why they were important to them. I just needed more information. And so I started on a journey of research. And so for 7 or 8 years now, that's what I've been doing, is trying to understand design systems. And as we do consulting work with our clients, I get a chance to talk to lots and lots of people. And every year, we do more formal research in the form of a design system survey. I hope that perhaps some of you have seen this in the past. This year's survey for 2022 will be out in just a few weeks. So if you want to be notified when that is released, we take the data, we analyze it, and we release all that information. You can follow here Sparkbox, and we'll message to you when it's free. Or this little link will get you a way to contact me, and I can send that to you as well. So we do lots of research here, and then as well, we also do quite a bit of client work for big organizations, many I hope that you have heard of. And all of this is about design systems, which is kind of a big part of our company's work. But just so that we're all on the same page, I want to explain very quickly what I mean when I say design system, because many people have many different ideas about this. This is a definition that I like: a living ecosystem of assets, tools, people, and processes that work together to create harmony across products and platforms, raise confidence and familiarity with our users, and save time and money for the organization. But I think that design systems are much bigger than any specific tool. They're not just a Figma file. They're not just React components, right? In fact, I like to imagine that design systems can exist outside of any tooling at all, because the tooling, the processes, all those things will always be changing, right? So we need to understand the smallest pieces and parts of the interfaces we're building outside of the context of any specific tools. And when design systems are done right, they become a language for our teams to be able to communicate more effectively. Now, one of the things that I've realized is that a lot of people try to define design systems without the context in which they exist. So I want to pause just briefly and share what I mean when I say this. Pretty much every organization is trying to connect their brand to their audience, right? And they do that in a lot of different ways. They print things and mail them to you, right? They create really neat in-store experiences for you to participate in. They do advertising. And a large part of almost every organization these days is their digital experiences. So things like websites and native applications, kiosks, things like this. And I believe that design systems sit right between the brand and these interfaces that we have to create. And they're there for us to be able to be more efficient, more consistent, more accessible with the work that we do. And this context is really important because it helps us identify what's coming into the system, things from brand, right? And what's going out, the digital experiences that we want to create. So with this little bit of context, let's talk quickly about what makes up a design system. So we've done some additional research to identify sort of the core parts of a design system, and we think they start with foundations. Foundations is a layer of a subset of the brand's organization, of the organization's brand that's to be used in design and development of digital interfaces. And once these foundations are established, we can take some of these things and codify them in the form of tokens. So we may take a single decision like a color and create a token that gives access to that color across lots of platforms, lots of channels. With this tokens layer, then we can create what we call core systems. So if that token was perhaps a spacing token, a certain amount of padding, then we can use that token to create layout systems, right? A combination of tokens, a combination of design decisions. And these three layers are fundamental to every interface that we can create. And with this work done, we can create what most people think of when they think of a design system, which is the component layer. Components contain the reusable pieces of a digital interface. This is what things like buttons and inputs, and then you can nest these together, right? So we might have a more complex section, a navigation that has things nested, and more complexity as the layers build. Now this is all very conceptual, but there are three parts to each of these layers. I could speak to you for hours about just this, but just to make sure. Three parts: assets, processes, and documentation. And these are just, the assets are the things that we use, so Figma files and code and all of the stuff in that context. And then processes are the way that we as humans interact around the design system. And then documentation is what exists to answer the questions about why and how do we use these things. And altogether, this anatomy of a design system just gives us a model so that we understand how to talk about these things. And so now that we all have at least some context around what a design system is, let's talk a little bit about how design systems mature. And part of our research has been in defining and observing how systems mature inside organizations. And we've found that there are kind of some core areas to think about here. There are 4 stages of maturity that we'll cover real quick. Origin stories, which impact how your system matures. There's a sort of a small framework for how to mature your system in a healthy way. And there's a framework for understanding how, once we have a system, how do we keep it stable in the midst of a lot of change. So let's jump in to the 4 stages. Here we go. Stage 1 is everything that happens before your design system is available to your internal subscribers. So it's the very earliest stage of design system maturity. It's everything including discovery that leads right up to that first initial release. And it can look very different depending on a lot of other factors for different organizations. But for a system to start off healthy, you have to dig into the foundations of your brand. That's really where this needs to come from. The decisions that you make in stage 1 have a big impact on how your system matures, and at its core, it's really about discovering the scope, the appropriate scope for your team, for your organization. Stage 2 we call growing adoption. So in almost every interview that I've done, and I've done hundreds of these with lots of folks, they are really excited once that first version is live to see if anybody else wants to use the thing they've spent so much time building. And so this becomes the priority once your system has been released. And it's really focused on understanding your subscribers. And when I say subscribers, I mean the people who you hope will use the system to build digital products. It's really about understanding what they need and how do you serve them well with the product, with the design system. Once you've reached a critical mass of adoption, you move to stage 3, which we call surviving the teenage years. And if you have children who are teenagers, maybe you understand this stage. But it comes with a whole set of new challenges. Lots of different users means you have lots of different problems. They're identifying bugs. They're asking for new features. They have a lot of requests on you. And in this phase, your team needs to grow in order to be able to support all of this additional change. And you probably, at this phase, are trying to figure out how do we allow subscribers to contribute back into the system when it's appropriate. And stage 4, we call evolving a healthy product. And this is really once your design system has become a fully realized product inside the organization. In a lot of ways, these systems help drive decisions inside organizations around product design. These design system teams are thinking about the future of the technology and the tooling and experimenting with that instead of the opposite, where your subscribers are changing how things should work and coming back with requests for you to update the system. You're driving that change. You have a stronger seat at the table. You're part of the conversation. And it turns out that when I first started interviewing to try and understand this, I realized there were so many different ideas and stories about how systems grew and matured. And I at one point almost gave up because I didn't think that I could make it all fit together in a single model. Then I realized that the origin story is actually really one of the core things that impacts how you mature. So let's talk quickly about origin stories. So there are 2 primary origin stories. The first is top-down, and this is when your design system is driven by executive leadership from the very beginning, right? Executive leadership, they're involved, they're bought in, they're supportive of this effort. And grassroots is when executive leadership, your higher up folks were not involved. And so it typically starts with an individual contributor who sees a need and wants this work to be done. It's easiest to tell which origin story you have by thinking about how leadership specifically was involved. So let's talk quickly about the differences between these. So top-down tends to have a lot more visibility, right? Because it's driven by leadership, they have expectations on you, they're talking about it with the organization. Grassroots, maybe nobody even knows it's happening except the person doing it. So almost no visibility. Also top-down, oftentimes there's a budget, and this is dedicated financial support for this effort. In the grassroots, many times there is no budget. You know, it's just somebody kind of working on the side. Sometimes even in the evening is doing this work. Top-down also oftentimes has a sanctioned team, so individuals who are dedicated to this or partial time sometimes dedicated to it. Grassroots, oftentimes there are a couple people doing the work, but it's over lunch or in the evenings, it's not official. And top-down systems tend to have a much broader scope because leadership from the beginning wants to see the impact across the whole organization. And so they come expecting lots of impact across lots of different disciplines, maybe many products, many brands. Grassroots, because it's started by an individual, the focus tends to be more narrow and deeper on the specific area where that individual works. And then pressure, you know, when it's driven by leadership, there's a lot more expectation on you. There's oftentimes deadlines and expected metrics that you have to meet. Whereas when you're just an individual contributor doing this work, it's something you want to do, so you're doing it for yourself or your team. Now, if you are doing design system work and you're looking at this and trying to figure out which were we? Were we top-down or grassroots? Sometimes it's a little confusing, and that's because these are 2 ends of a spectrum, right? There are lots of different paths through this. And so there's lots of options that fit somewhere in the middle as well. It helps to think about them kind of like this. And this just means that because it's about how the initial version of your system is created, the differences between a top-down and a grassroots system are very noticeable. But as the system matures, they get closer and closer together. And by the end, a stage 3 or a stage 4 design system, you oftentimes can't tell what the origin story was at this point. And so while, here we go. So visually, the top-down system is going to become more and more like a grassroots system as it evolves. And the same is true for a grassroots, which will become more and more like a stage 4, like a top-down as it matures. And there's lots of other options, as I mentioned. This is a story that I hear from lots of folks. They'll say that the initial version of their system was very grassroots, just individuals doing the work. They felt that their product needed this, and they did so. And then leadership hears about it, and they understand this could be really powerful for our organization. So they come by with lots of money and a team, and they say, now we want this everywhere. And so you have this jump all the way up to top down, only in stage 2. This can be very jarring for a team, but it happens often. And none of these are right or wrong. There are lots of paths through. The point is that it's helpful to understand what your system is and how you started, because that will impact the decisions you make. So we've got the 4 stages, and we have a basic understanding of top-down and grassroots origin stories. So let's talk quickly about how do you actually mature? Like what's the process for doing that? So there's 3 things that you have to always be thinking about as you do this work. And this is in every stage. You've always got to be educating, you've always got to be engaging, and you always have to be evolving. When I say educate, I simply mean like a one-way interaction where you, who are working on the design system, are talking to product teams, explaining why this is important, describing the value, explaining what this will look like, how it will serve those teams. So it's spreading the word, it's casting a vision. Engaging is 2-way. This is where you're working with the subscribers or product teams to understand their needs, maybe even having them help you with the system. So this is a 2-way interaction. This could be observation, interviews. This could be a form where they're filling out and sharing information with you, requesting features, those kinds of things. And then evolution, of course, is simply making the system better. It's about continuously iterating on this system because things are always changing, as we know, right? Now, one of the most common problems that I see in my consulting work is that a design system team, is maybe focused on one of these, usually on evolving the system, and they're not thinking so much about educating and engaging with those product teams. And so oftentimes they'll mature quickly to stage 2 or 3, but they haven't done any education and they get stuck. Or a lot of times we can figure out why that's the case because they haven't focused on all of these things. Now, I wish I could tell you that it's just a list you have to do, right? Do these things in these 3 categories and you'll be fine, but it's obviously not that simple. I like to think about these as sort of a spiral. And so as you're getting started, you have to always be doing these 3 activities, and eventually you'll realize you've evolved to a new stage. And what's interesting is that the kinds of activities change as you move through the stages. So let's take a look at how that could look. Here we go. So what happens is each stage requires you to add new tasks in each of these categories, but you can never really stop doing the things you did in the earlier stages. So that means we call this additive, right? So you're just continuously adding new tasks that you have to be thinking about as a design system team. So if we look at how these work through each stage, there's lots and lots of things. This is just a small sample of the kinds of things that you would be doing. But in stage 1, thinking about, defining, just offering a simple definition, because a lot of teams, even very large organizations who have had design systems for years, when we interview all these individuals, they all have different ideas about what the system is and how it should work. So taking the time to step back and educate around just what it is and why it's important is really critical. Discovery, understanding what the product should be, and working towards that first release. The same kind of things you would do for a public-facing product you have to do in these early stages. In stage 2, again, lots of different things here, but now you have a system. So the education shifts a little bit from just defining what a system is to showing how it works. And we always recommend that you do demos regularly as you're iterating, record those, make those available for the teams. In stage 2, sometimes we see the design system team take a role in onboarding new employees, especially designers, developers, product folks, because understanding how an organization designs and builds interfaces is core to those roles. So the design system team can help educate those folks early on. Lots of engagement here, gathering feedback now that folks are using it, pairing with subscribers, supporting them, lots of things to do. And lots of documentation to create still. And remember, we're not just creating components, we're creating also the processes and all of the documentation that's needed. Product roadmaps, things like this. Stage 3, evolving the teenage years, things get very complicated. This is where we see a lot of times, in order to get to this stage, you've had to make a lot of promises to your leadership. You've said that this is going to make us faster, it's going to make our products more consistent. When you reach stage 3, they're going to start asking you to keep those promises, right? They're going to want to see the proof. And so you have to have captured those metrics. You have to be willing to sort of turn into a salesperson, right? And convince folks this is worth doing. We see really sophisticated communication strategies here. Lots of interesting programs like hosting subscriber teams on the design system team, inviting them to come and work with them, or sending an ambassador from the team out to a product team. Lots of clarification as well in the documentation around processes. There's so many things to define here. It's difficult to get them all done at the beginning. So as the system matures, we see the documentation also maturing. And stage 4, there's sort of this concept of culture, design system culture, and really the point is to try and be able to tell the narrative, the history of the system. That becomes really important for the organization if you want that system to continue to grow and stay healthy, and really demonstrating that it's doing the work. And this is where the systems actually take a leadership role. Stage 4 teams will say, when I talk to product designers who have stage 4 design systems that they use, they'll often talk to me about how the design system team is the strongest team at their organization. This is the team that's training designers, training UX thinking, training engineers, and it's really quite interesting to see that happen. So now I want to talk quickly about stability in your system. And one of the things that happens is design systems they're only valuable if they last over time, right? And so as things are changing in the organization, and lots of things are always changing, there's many destabilizing forces like this. So your teams may be changing, leadership changes. When they come in, they want to make their mark, and so they make a change, sometimes for no reason. The people who are subscribing are changing. The tools in the industry, all kinds of things, right? And for a system to be valuable, it has to work over a long period of time. And so with all of this fluctuation, it's difficult for a system to maintain stability. So we've identified 3 primary stabilizing forces, we call them. And those are authority, value, and tradition. So very quickly with each, authority just means that leadership actively supports the design system team and their goals. And this gives that team the confidence to really carry out the work, knowing their leaders have their back. And the critical word here is actively. So if you can't point to very specific things your leadership is doing to support you, then you really don't have this stabilizing benefit. These kinds of teams that have this stabilizer will say things. They'll identify that they have very real budgets, very real team sizes, they have dedicated time, dedicated staff, and they have a lot of encouragement from their leadership for the entire organization to help evolve the system, not just to use it. Value means that the system offers actual value to the people you want to use it. And what's funny is getting people to use your system is very simple if you have created a system that's something they want to use, right? So talking to them and understanding the problems they have helps you create something that's valuable. And that value is a stabilizing force as lots of things in the organization change. Folks who have this kind of stabilizer, they see very rapid adoption. So teams just jump on board. They're really excited to use it. They have lots of feature requests, lots of bug reports, and there's a lot of willingness for those teams to help evolve the system. Now, tradition is a little bit different. It means that the system has become the way we build interfaces inside of your organization. Once it's taken root, there is a lot of stability in its acceptance, right, as a way of working. And a sign that you have this stabilizer is when you hear your team saying things like, our design system is the single source of truth. So this is a very strong stabilizer. It's a little different in some ways because it's really about having authority and value over time is how you earn tradition. And so it's not something that you can just do. It requires a length of time, and it becomes part of the culture. Now, if you think about these three stabilizers as the legs of a tripod, it makes a lot of sense. Having a single one means it could be susceptible to forces from lots of different directions. It can fall any direction. Having two means it has more stability, but can only fall in a couple directions. And having all three, which is really what we're after, means that you have this nice spot of stability in the center. So the goal is to work towards gaining all of these stabilizers. But of course, you're not going to have them all as you get started. And what can happen is that once you have them, you have to maintain them. It's easy to forget this and to allow them to slip. Because things are always changing, you really do have to be diligent in this. One quick example would be that if you start here and have all three, if you slow down evolving the system, that puts you in this place. It's hard to see, but I'm in the top with authority and tradition only. But because the system isn't growing and maturing, you're losing value. And this is a very risky place because it's where leadership is saying we have to work this way. And tradition is dictating this is how we do work, but the way we're saying you should work is not valuable, right? People are not going to feel trusted inside the organization, so it's not a healthy place to be. Additionally, this bottom right with just value and tradition is also risky. And if you remember that story that I told you at the beginning about the client who called us and said, stop working on the design system, that client was Gap. Gap and Banana Republic and Old Navy, these brands. And they, what happened in this situation is that we had created something really valuable, okay? And lots of teams wanted to use it. And so we found ourselves here in this bottom right where we had value and lots of folks using it. It had become tradition, but we hadn't ever really interacted with Gap's leadership. And so as they spent more and more money on this project, somewhere they crossed a threshold of cost. And that popped up on a spreadsheet for some executive who said, hey, what is this design system thing that we're spending all this money on? And that's when we got the phone call saying, stop, don't work on this because we don't understand. Now, lucky for us, our peers inside the organization were able to go back to, I think, about 12 product teams who had been using the design system for a year. And they asked them, go think about this project you did where we helped you and you used the design system to do this work. If you hadn't had the design system, how long would it have taken you to do that work? And so they got rough numbers from 12 different teams and came back together and we did the math on this and realized that for every dollar they had invested in the design system, they had earned 3 back just in developer efficiency. And so we could take that data to the leadership and say to them, it was much more efficient. We're creating space for innovation, space for better work. And so then they said, okay, you can continue. And we're still working with them on that design system today. So that's this example of having only value and tradition, but without authority. And that's a very risky place to be. So we needed to get back to the center of having all 3 of these. So altogether, this gives us a way to really consider and create stability in the design systems. And that gives us a more sustainable approach to the work. So we have the 4 stages. We have these origin stories, a small framework for how to mature, and once your system is mature, how do we maintain stability? And there's so much more to this, so much more. So I would love to talk to you about that. Come find me. I'll be around mingling. And I have just a few resources for you as well here to wrap up. So I mentioned the survey. We will release this soon, but the results for last year's survey are live, so you can always go and see those. So I'll share these links as well on Twitter. We have done recently a study to sort of prove in some way that systems are more efficient. And so this is the results of that study that we did. We have also created a design system calendar because there's so much to be thinking about as a design system team. And so this just puts something on your calendar once a week. It gives you a reminder to be thinking about something different. So it's a good way to stay fresh and consider what you should be thinking about if you own it or work on a design system. This is an article we published on A List Apart talking about the job that it requires of every design system team to have to always be selling. I know that we didn't sign up to be salespeople, but that is definitely part of the job. And so this article gives you some advice on how to change your language to speak with executives about these things. We offer short consulting engagements if you're having trouble figuring out where you are and you need help maturing. So that's something that we can talk about. We also have created a maturity assessment. So this is online for free. You can take a short survey, answer, I think it's half a dozen questions, and it'll help you figure out where in that maturity model your system lives and give you lots of very specific advice for how to mature it. And then I would love to hear your feedback. So if you have a different story, if you feel that you don't fit into this, or if you have other ideas or things that would be valuable in this research, please reach out. You can do so here. And I just want to say thank you to my team as well. This is more than one person could do, so I am very grateful to have many folks on my team who have helped with this research. You can see all of their smiling faces on our website at sparkbox.com. And thank you so much. I don't know if we have time or not for questions, but I appreciate your time.